Hello, I'm Pastor Daniel Ostercamp, and I serve at Trinity Lutheran Church in Halleck, Minnesota, way up in the northwest corner. I'm here today to review this book, The Coddling of the American Mind, by Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt. This book was first suggested to me by a friend of mine, and I listened to it on Audible and also read it. I've enjoyed it immensely. It really helped me to see new things in a new light. Proverbs 22, verse 6 states this: Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. As parents, we may struggle with the challenge of this verse. We know children are such a wonderful gift, but they don't raise themselves. We are given the vocation of father and mother. We nurture them, we feed them with good things, we guide them, instruct them, protect them, discipline them. We pray over them. We bring them to church, baptism, the Lord's Prayer, for the sacrament of communion, and for confirmation. And in the midst of this, I think we are always crying out to God, Lord, help us. Lord, have mercy on us for the mistakes we make, and give us peace and patience so we may know that they will do well in their lives. We certainly don't want to give them anything false, anything corrupt, anything for harmful ways. We worry about the long-term impact of what we do. The Bible provides us with a lot that is in terms of wisdom. Proverbs 2, verse 6 says, For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. Book of James, verse 1, If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generosity to all without reproach, and it will be given him. And our Lord Jesus Christ, in the Sermon on the Mount, gave us many good ways for living and called us to a good life, even a righteous and holy life. At the end of it, he says, Everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house upon the rock. From there, you can oftentimes preach what it means to have a house, a foundation, and rock that even when the storms come, the winds beat, the waves come upon us, we know we are strong in God. So, what we have as Christians is also brought over into other cultures and religions. The wisdom tradition is very important. If you're a successful society, you need to raise your children well. You need to honor the gift they are and prepare them for a hopeful future. The authors are not arguing here that the students of today are somehow spoiled. They still do have it very difficult. Competition with stress, student debt, struggling for their jobs, for having the resources they need. I don't want to call them snowflakes either, and simply wipe them off dismissively. They understand that these students deserve the best we can give to them. And yet, there is an aspect of our culture currently that has to do with coddling of the American mind, particularly our teenagers and college students. And the authors aren't particularly crazy about that word, but what they're really trying to get at, or at least their editors were, is that it's an overprotection of our youth and our students. It's being worried about so many dangers that are to them, multiplying the number of threats in their life, and therefore it's taking away the necessary challenges that all of us need to grow strong. And as such, by overprotecting our kids, we end up creating a generation that is seeing increasing rates of anxiety, depression, even suicide, because they're kind of being told that in a way you are fragile, you are easily hurt, and that we don't want you to triumph over danger the way other generations likely did. No, these authors, they want kids to be raised, to be confident, to be resilient, to know that they've overcome challenges. The genesis of this book actually goes back about 10 years, May of 2014. Greg Lukianoff is a First Amendment lawyer. And since 2001, he's been fighting for academic freedom and freedom of speech on campus. And usually it was administrators or supporters of the college or alumni who didn't want an opposite viewpoint preached on campus. But now they're finding that students are raising up these complaints and they're saying that words are dangerous, that certain arguments trigger them into um, anxious attacks. They feel unsafe if someone would come on campus and say something different than what they believe, and they're harmed somehow by words and by disagreement. What this also did, in terms of Greg's interest in talking to Jonathan Haidt, was that there was an intersection here with moral psychology. And Dr. Haidt had studied what's known as cognitive behavioral therapy and how that overlaps with ancient wisdom. What we'll get into is more of how that's a modern psychological approach developed by Dr. Aaron Beck in about 1960, and it helps people when they're feeling depressed or unhappy or ill at ease to really question their thoughts, to think about why is it that I'm thinking this way, and what can I do to attack the source of my anxiety. In any event, uh, Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt, they published an article in The Atlantic in August of 2015 with the title The Coddling of the American Mind. And they were somewhat concerned that the things they put out would be met with criticism and refusal to really believe it. But it was overwhelmingly positive. Indeed, it was one of the 5 most viewed articles on the website in the history. And again, the main thrust was students should not be coddled and protected from different points of view. Rather, when they enter a college or university, they should expect to be challenged. They should welcome the opportunity to duke it out in the classroom, to tell other people, no, that's wrong, and to be ready for the time honored way of argument. Again, um, what uh, Haidt and Kanoff recognized, however, was that the current atmosphere of the university is to not welcome critical thinking skills, but rather fall back into um, the 3 great untruths. That's what they called them. Pardon me. Now, the 3 great untruths are at the heart of this book, and the criteria to be one of 3. First of all, it must contradict ancient wisdom, that is, the common inherited tradition across many, if not all, cultures. It also contradicts modern psychological research on well being, namely, setting aside cognitive behavioral distortions in favor of questioning your feelings. And the third one is it harms the individuals and communities who embrace it. Now, again, this is an interesting book because it doesn't want to put some people in the role of villains and others in the role of heroes. Rather, it describes what has been happening in terms of the rules, the practices, the norms that have been imposed upon our youth, even if they're trying to do it with the best intention. The subtitle is How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. Now, let's open up those three bad ideas, the three great untruths. First one is the untruth of fragility, or what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. This process is out there now to eliminate or avoid anything that feels unsafe or uncomfortable. And that goes directly against the ancient wisdom of, say, Meng Zhu of the 4th century BCE, who said that when heaven is about to confer great responsibility upon any man, it will exercise his mind with suffering, subject his sinews and bones to hard work, expose his body to hunger, put him to poverty, place obstacles in the paths of his deeds, so as to stimulate his mind, harden his nature, and improve wherever he is incompetent. We certainly can find many examples in the Old and New Testaments of examples of prophets, evangelists, teachers who were tested, who were put through difficult times, and it made them stronger in what they were sharing. So the authors are saying students need to have challenges. They need to be given more and more difficult exercises and to um, see that they can indeed make it. They use the analogy of our immune system. You and I, we have wonderful immune systems that fight off disease, but if they're going to do that, they need exposure. They need to have the microbes, the bacteria, the difficult things of this world so that they can um, develop a response so that if a larger amount of those things comes at a later date, they'll know what they are looking for and start developing the white blood cells and go after them. They draw upon some other writing that talks about how by no means are humans fragile. They're actually rather resilient. And even more so, there's another term that is uh, greater still, and that's the term of being anti-fragile. You see, overprotection actually ruins us. If we were to lie in bed all the time, our muscles would atrophy. If we were to only look at silly movies all the time, our brains would rot. We actually need stressors. We need challenges. We need weightlifting. We need good movies and good books so that we can think through the difficult matters of life. Pardon me. What has happened in our world is that a safetyism has taken root. The authors go so far to call it the cult of safetyism, where we need to create safe spaces for people in case they're feeling any kind of discomfort, in case they're triggered by something. Um, and there's also been the reality of concept creep. 30, 40 years ago, to say someone was traumatized meant that they were gone through an experience that was very difficult, something that would evoke distress in everyone and outside the range of anything that was ordinary and was quite extraordinary. But nowadays, we talk about PTSD and we use it much more loosely to describe a wide range of symptoms and realities. Similarly, the book talks about how a classroom might talk about how the United States is a rape culture and how um, our, um, our practices and our norms have and instituted that sense of women being at the mercy of men at all times and all places. But as lamentable as some of our gender relationships may be and difficult, it is certainly not like Afghanistan, where the men are in complete control of women's bodies and brothers and uncles can kill a woman if she turns out to have a relationship outside of marriage. That would indeed be a rape culture. So, again, we need to understand that within a system, there are always going to be stressors, challenges, difficulties. There's going to be an argument about this way or that to understand something. And it's okay to even be exposed to some triggers, to walk through these things, because that's actually where healing will happen. It's cognitive behavioral therapy that when you are feeling um, discomfort and unhappy, then maybe be exposed to that somewhat, or walk through your hurt rather than avoiding it all completely. Even more so, safetyism wants to protect you from all kinds of hurt, but shouldn't there be reasonable trade-offs in life? Like if you're going to go ride your bike down the street, I guess you could get run over by a car, but then you'd miss out on the joy of a beautiful summer day and the freedom of riding your bike. At the end, you can also sum it up in terms of this folk wisdom. We prepare the child for the road. We don't prepare the road for the child. Meaning, no parent can go out there and take away all the dangers in the world. We know that rather we teach the child what things to avoid, how to heal themselves when they are hurt, where to go if there's an emergency. The second great untruth is the untruth of emotional reasoning, summarized as always trust your feelings. The point of wisdom here that speaks against that is this: what really frightens us and dismays us is not external events, but the way in which we think about them. It is not things that disturb us, but our interpretation of their significance. Excuse me. You and I, we know we've had bad experiences. We might, at the end of the day, get home and say, well, I'm no good. I really failed at my test. I really blew this assignment. I'm just no good. It always happens to me like that. Or we might look around and reinforce the negatives and come out at the end and say, my world is bleak. Nothing good is ever going to happen to me. We might say, the future's hopeless. I have no friends. No one cares about me. All of those things, if you would take a minute, 10 minutes, an hour to uh, to judge, to critique with your mind, you can say, well, no, I do manage to get some things done some days. I do have happy days as well. I do have this about my life. I do have a friend. I'm going to call him right now, see how he's doing. That is the way that cognitive distortions, schemas that can get into your head and drive you where you really don't need to go, can rule your life. Cognitive behavioral therapy can teach you how to free yourself from that so that your mind is not dictated and ruled by your emotions, but rather your mind can question your feelings and bring evidence back against to it. The difficulty with this in this common university age is that oftentimes people will say something and say, well, I feel what I think is right. I feel it's right. And then if someone brings counter evidence, they'll say, well, I still feel this way. That makes no sense at all in the search of truth. There's also a developing trend of what's called microaggressions. That if I say something you don't like, then the important thing is how you would interpret it and how you would go immediately to an emotion rather than to um, give me the benefit of the doubt of what I was saying, and rather to um, set it back with thoughts rather than feelings. What's happened in our culture is that being a victim is the greatest thing to be in terms of the argument. If I can say I'm hurt by that, if I can say you've damaged me with that, then somehow I have a point to raise other than saying, no, that's just wrong. Part of this is in our Christian tradition of the eighth commandment, do not bear false witness, where Martin Luther says, um, interpret what your neighbor says and does in the most charitable light possible. Give them the empathy, give them the room to work. Know that you need them to be part of the community. What this has also led to on campuses is something called disinvitation. A speaker will be given an invite to come, an event will be arranged, but then someone else will find out about it and say, well, wait a minute, that point of view is offensive to me. That argument is not within my realm of what's acceptable, so I'm going to protest and I'm going to fight that not be allowed. If it is allowed, then I need a safe space to be treated well while it's going on, instead of just saying, well, I won't go to it. I'll go do something else and I'll let it go on. No, no. There's been much more militancy, going back to Greg Lukianoff's thing about protecting free speech. In the end, we come back to ancient wisdom. This one is from Buddha. Your worst enemy cannot harm you as much as your own thoughts unguarded. If you let them run wild, you will harm yourself with your thoughts and feelings. But one may, uh, what, once mastered, once your thoughts are mastered, no one can help you as much, not even your father or your mother. Third great untruth is that of us versus them. Life is a battle between good people and evil people. The quote for there is, there's a moral dualism that sees good and evil as instincts within us, between we must choose. There's also what I will call a pathological dualism that sees humanity itself as radically divided into the unimpeachably good and the irredeemably bad. You are either one or the other. From Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks in his book, Not in God's Name. Problem is when we take a complex reality with many different kinds of points of view and we boil it down to a simple narrative where some are demonized and some are lionized. We put the worst interpretation possible upon the demonized, and we put ourselves in the lionized and give ourselves only the purest of motives. This is really where tribalism becomes at full blast. The researchers show that there's many different ways that tribalism rears itself. We'll always want to be in group and out group and take different steps. The development of identity politics has been very serious in this regard. The authors talk about how at some times in history, namely Martin Luther King Jr. in the 60s, it was a common humanity, identity politics, where we're all in this together. We're trying to change the hearts and minds of people so that we can all receive the American dream. We want to conquer with forgiveness and love. But now it's about common enemy. identity politics, where we drive out the villains, where the groups struggle for power. In this regard, what is being drawn out is a Marxian, is kind of Marxist analysis through the work of Herbert Marcuse, where he changed things, not so much a power struggle of workers versus owner, but now the struggle of those who are not as fortunate and those who are fortunate. Civil rights, women's rights, other kinds of racial and social movements wanted justice and equality, so that we wanted a reversal of power was the real goal. And it's interesting because in his work, there's a justifiable use of repression and indoctrination to make things go. Since you have a moral cause and a just cause, you can, at those times, have what's called a liberating tolerance, not a indiscriminate tolerance. We can't tolerate all points of view, but rather we must accept, promote, teach those kinds of tolerance that build about the reversal of power. There's several different forms, modern forms of Marxism that have taken over the university. The authors demonstrate how, for example, by political leanings, the professors have gone much farther to the left than to the right, whereas in 20 years ago even there was more of a balance, which provided the diversity viewpoint on a faculty that is helpful. The chief one they opened up was called intersectionality. This was developed in a 1989 essay by Kimberly Crenshaw and also put forward in a TED Talk in 2016. And in part, it's a good thing to recognize that there are ways that society still has bigotry and bias. We need to work with compassion to right these injustices. At the same time, the opportunity for tribalism goes way, way up when we look at people's privilege on 14 different axes, 7 of which are able, disabled, cis, trans, heterosexual, homosexual, white, non-white, male, female, upper class, poor, fertile, infertile. We look at those things and we say that by nature, those who occupy places of privilege are the oppressors, and those who have less privilege are by nature the oppressed. Those who have colonized the world versus those who have been subjected to their power. You make this an us versus them situation from the beginning. What that has done as well on our campuses is having a call out culture, where if you would speak against such dogma, if you would question the groupthink, if you would not be a crusader but rather have to be a follower, then you are cast out. This is done has really made an anti-intellectual spirit and a fear. You don't want to say what you think or what you hold to be true. You want to go along with everybody else. The book goes on. Well, that's the heart of the story, the three great untruths. And as we can grasp hold of that and the damage it's causing to our society, particularly our teenagers and college students, the rest of the things follow. There are some helpful chapters on bad ideas in action, how there's been intimidation, there's been witch hunts, faculty members being cast out without due process or being protected by their colleagues, but rather the fear of also being caught up in the witch hunt. There's also a good chapters about how did we get here? Well, it's about polarization, about anxiety, depression. It's about social media, the rampant nature of how that works. It is also about paranoid parenting, being so worried about your kids you can't let them get out and play. It's a great chapter on free range parenting. And again, kids need to have play. They need to experiment. They need to get into trouble, for heaven's sake. They can find their way out of it again. Coddling the American Mind. I recommend it highly. There is a need for us to develop wiser kids who can test things, can see what is right, who can test the spirits, whether they are leading them in a good direction or not. We need to have wiser universities, places where they indeed seek truth, and not simply repetition of the accepted dogma or groupthink. I've been blessed to find a Substack community on coddling of the American mind. There's also a movie that's been distributed through the different streaming services, which demonstrates how these developments, even as they try to help people in their challenges of anxiety and depression, are actually increasing it. You're not a weak person out there. You're strong. You'll make it through today. Your God will lead you forward throughout all of your life, and He will give you the strength, the peace, and the mercy you need to live a helpful life, live a good life, live within the peace of God. Thank you for listening to my review. Again, I'm Pastor Daniel Ostercamp at Trinity Lutheran Church in Halleck, Minnesota. It's been my pleasure. Thank you to Dennis Nelson, Joel Oz for your work on this. Peace.